It was a bizarre murder that made headlines around the world. Imagine having a conversation with one of your friends over a webcam, something that most of us do at one point or another. Except this time, you inadvertently witnessed their murder. Kind of sounds like the plot of a made-for-TV horror movie, but that's exactly what happened to one young man back in 2011. Zhen Meng was on his computer in Beijing, talking to his ex-girlfriend who lived in Toronto, when suddenly there was a knock on her door, and Zhen Meng watched in horror as she struggled with an intruder in her apartment. This is the story of the webcam murder. 23-year-old Qian Liu was originally from China and an international student studying at York University. She lived in a small basement apartment off campus, in a townhouse complex that was popular with students, mainly because it was more affordable than on-campus housing. She had previously graduated from Beijing City College and moved to Toronto in September 2010 to study English at York University. Friends would describe her as ambitious, courteous, and hardworking. She was a person who loved to socialize, had a love of learning, and had a talent for traditional Chinese painting. To communicate with friends and family back home in China, she would use Skype and MSN Messenger and would speak with her mother every morning. In the early morning hours of April 14, 2011, Qian Liu was on her laptop studying, while also chatting with her ex-boyfriend, Zhen Meng, who lived in Beijing. The two began dating when they were teenagers and were together for 7 years, but broke up in early 2011 after she moved to Canada to attend university. That evening, Qian would message Zhen Meng and asked him to keep her company while she was online. Around 1 a.m., Qian suddenly heard a light knock on her apartment door, and the door to her apartment didn't have a peephole, so she was unable to see who was on the other side of the door. She was speaking English to whoever was on the other side of her apartment door, so Zhen Meng was unable to understand. When Qian opened the door, Zhen Meng would see a tall man standing in the doorway. The man would ask to use her cell phone, which she would retrieve and hand to him. While the man was using her phone, Qian would sit back down at her computer. At this point, Zhen Meng got a good look at the man. He was described as white, between 20 to 30 years old, about 6 feet, with brown hair that was medium length and messy at the front and short in the back. The man was also wearing a blue crewneck t-shirt. Things were relatively calm when out of nowhere, Zhen Meng saw the man try to force his way into Qian's apartment. Qian would attempt to close the door, but the man would force his way inside and close the door behind him. The man would grab her by the shoulders and tried to hug her, but she told him no in both Mandarin and English and attempted to push him away. The man would then push Qian and she fell to the floor, with her attacker following her. At this point, both the man and Qian were both out of view of the camera. However, Zhen Meng said he could still hear what was going on in the room. He could see one of Qian's feet lift up, as she was still saying no in Mandarin. After that, he would hear 2 muffled thumps, and then heard no further noises from Qian Liu. However, he continued to hear other sounds in the room for another 20 minutes after that. There was a brief moment of silence, and then Zhen Meng heard heavy breathing coming from the man. And then he heard sounds similar to keys jingling and furniture being moved. And then the man would appear again in front of the webcam completely naked and shut off the computer. Zhen Meng had watched the entire ordeal completely horrified and helpless to do anything. He would later say at the time his mind went blank and was cursing the man from behind his webcam. It's highly unusual for there to be an eyewitness to a murder, let alone an eyewitness on the other side of the planet. The video of the attack had not been recorded. However, Zhen Meng did have a recording of the audio, but because of the time difference and the language barrier, Zhen Meng struggled to contact someone to check up on Qian Liu. Zhen Meng didn't speak English, but he did have Qian's password for one of her online accounts, so he logged in and sent messages to all of her friends in Canada. However, because Beijing is 12 hours ahead of Toronto, Everyone he reached out to was sleeping at the time. It wasn't until 8:30 the next morning that Qian's friends received the urgent messages asking them to check up on her. Zhen Meng would also call Qian's parents and beg them to call the police. He would tell them that someone was in Qian's room and tried to hurt her. Her mother was in disbelief, and her father was out of town on business. So they waited patiently for more news. But after more than 10 hours of waiting, at about 5 a.m., they would get the news that no parent ever wants to hear.
Your friend called you to let you know she's in danger?
Yes.
What's your friend's name?
Liu Qian.
Liu Chen?
Yes.
So the boyfriend said there's someone there that shouldn't be there?
Yes.
Back in Canada, Qian's landlord would be notified and open the door to her room with a master key. Her body would be discovered at 11 a.m. Saturday morning. 911 would be contacted, but since Qian's friends and roommates couldn't speak English very well, the dispatcher had trouble understanding exactly what was going on. Ambulance and police were finally dispatched to the scene after another tenant named Soham Joshi, who lived in the same townhouse, was able to speak to 911. On the 911 recording, the operator could be heard urging Joshi and the others to check for signs of life and to see if there was anything in Qian's mouth obstructing her breathing.
To see if she's breathing.
No, I don't think so. It's blood everywhere.
But Joshi would tell the operator that her body was stiff and he was unable to turn her over. When police and emergency workers arrived at Qian's apartment, they found her naked from the waist down and blood by her head. Her underwear, socks, and tights were found tangled up and close to her body. Her hair was disheveled, and her hand was pointed towards the door of her bedroom. When police first spoke with the media, they called Qian's death suspicious, but wouldn't yet call it a homicide. Investigators were in contact with the coroner's office, and it would be a while before they could determine the cause of death. But toxicology tests and preliminary results were being rushed. It was noted that both Qian's IBM ThinkPad computer and external camera were missing from her apartment. But police did find a cell phone in their search, although they would later determine that that phone was inactive. Qian's current phone, a Nokia Express music phone, was missing. As soon as the media learned that the murder was witnessed over webcam, the story would go viral and became known internationally as the webcam murder. Rumors about Qian's murder began to spread online, including a rumor that she was being stalked by a man that she had rejected. There was also an online rumor that Qian had been killed by lethal injection. And a photo of the man, suspected to be stalking Qian, was also posted online in Chinese chat rooms. The rumors were getting so out of hand that the Toronto police were forced to make a statement, telling the media that they were investigating several persons of interest, and cautioned the public about publishing photos.
On Sunday, I spoke about a person of interest to this investigation. He has at times been referred to as a suspect in the media. From a police perspective, there is an important distinction between a suspect and a person of interest. For clarity, a person of interest, by definition, is a person whose background, relationship with a victim, or opportunity to commit an offense may warrant further inquiry. But at the time, no other grounds exist to suggest culpability in the commission of the crime being investigated. A photo of Ms. Liu and this person of interest have been circulating in the public forum, both on the internet and I understand also in the media. And there has been some misinformation to suggest, and conclusions have been drawn, that this man is in fact the intruder that was seen by the online witness over the webcam. At this time, I do not, and I repeat, do not confirm that this is a fact. We have interviewed this person very early on in this investigation and are working towards excluding him as being connected with Ms. Liu's death. Until such time, I request that the media respect his privacy and not present his photograph.
Police also squashed the rumors that Qian was being stalked in a criminal sense. Qian lived in a townhouse that had been converted into student housing. As a result, she lived with 11 other roommates, which isn't unusual for off-campus student housing, and police were eager to speak with all of them. They were also investigating her previous address for connections to the case. Qian had lived at 2 addresses since moving to Toronto. She first lived at 46 Haynes Avenue, before moving on January 27th to 27 Aldwinkle Heights, where the attack took place. The 2 locations are close to each other, only about 500 meters apart, in a subdivision just south of York University. Photos of Qian's laptop were also released to the public, as well as photos of her missing Nokia smartphone. Less than 24 hours after police announced that Qian's death was being treated as a homicide, a 29-year-old man named Brian Dickson would be arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It's important to note that Brian Dickson is not the man whose photos were being circulated online. At the very moment that Brian was being charged with first-degree murder, Qian's devastated parents would arrive at Pearson International Airport from Beijing. They would tell reporters that only an hour before she was murdered, she had spoken with her mother, telling her how much she missed home, and they would thank the people who were concerned with their daughter's case. Shortly after Brian Dickson was arrested, Ontario Superior Court Justice Anne Molly would deny bail, citing, amongst other factors, his unstable lifestyle. Even though he had a very good relationship with his parents, who were offering to be his sureties, Brian's mother had a professional background in mental health, and his father was a retired family service worker for the Children's Aid Society and a published children's author. Justice Anne Molly noted that Brian's parents were exceptional human beings, but decided there was a substantial likelihood that he would commit further crimes. So, just who was Brian Dickson? And how did he know Qian? Well, he was a person who had a pattern of rarely finishing what he started. He graduated from Riverdale Collegiate in 2000, before attending York University, where he would enroll in a global politics program. He had basically been taking classes at York University on and off for over 10 years before Qian was murdered. He seemed more interested in extracurriculars than actually attending classes. While attending York University, he co-founded York's Model NATO organization and attended international conferences. Dixon worked as an executive assistant to the president of the NATO-affiliated Atlantic Council of Canada in 2008, and he was involved in Developments in Literacy, an NGO that seeks to improve literacy in underdeveloped areas in Pakistan. He was twice re-elected vice president of the Undergraduate Political Science Council and served as a counselor representing McLaughlin College in York's Federation of Students. He also worked as a running instructor and was an amateur actor, participating in the Players Academy in 2008, playing the part of Gilbert Blythe in Anne of Green Gables. While Brian had never been convicted of a crime, he was known to police. He had previously been charged with sexual assault in 2006, although those charges would later be withdrawn 3 months later. And he had also been charged with assault after attempting to choke a former girlfriend. However, these charges also wouldn't proceed to trial. After he was arrested, York University was quick to distance themselves from Brian Dickson and would tell the National Post that he wasn't a registered student, nor did he hold a degree from York. At the time of Qian's death, Brian Dickson was working a job handing out flyers, not attending university, and during the 10 years he was on again and off again at York, he moved back and forth between apartments and living at his parents' house. Like many people, he had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, but at the time of Qian's death, he was off his medication and said to be doing well. Although, at the time of his arrest, there were a number of medications in Brian's room, including an antipsychotic medication. Brian lived in the same townhouse as Qian. But at this point, police wouldn't release any more details of their relationship. The townhouses, where about 800 students lived, were originally intended for families, but many of these units had been subdivided into rooming houses, with space for dozens of tenants. Each room only had enough space for a bed, desk, and tiny kitchenette. And this was over 10 years ago. Since this case occurred, and now with the housing crisis in Canada, the problem with overcrowding in off-campus housing has only gotten worse. In many parts of Toronto, rooming houses are illegal, mainly because of safety concerns and fire code regulations. Qian lived in the 3-bedroom townhouse with 11 other roommates, one of whom was Brian Dickson. She rented a room in the basement, while his room was on the main floor. According to her other roommates, Brian had direct access to Qian's apartment by using the home's original staircase. He had only met Qian 1 month before her murder, while he was doing laundry. The laundry room happened to be located in the basement, right outside her bedroom door. On the night of the murder, Brian claimed he was downstairs doing his laundry when he bumped into Qian. They talked about cooking while Brian put his clothes into the washing machine. The time was close to 10 p.m. According to Brian, he then left the building to go to a restaurant on campus. During a videotaped interview with police, he would tell them several times that people could verify that he was there.
We started talking about, like, the fact that there's no oven, and she told me that they don't have ovens in China, apparently. So I put my clothes in the wash. The girl came out of her room, and that's how we got to talking. Went back into her room, continued talking about the cooking.
Did you kill Nicole?
No! I did not. I had nothing at all to do with it.
He then got home around 12:30 a.m. and then went downstairs to put his clothing in the dryer and told police that he didn't see Qian. When asked by police how much alcohol he had to drink that evening, Brian would say he had 3 beers at home and a pitcher of beer at the restaurant. However, the times didn't match up. A server at the restaurant would say that Brian was there at around 1 a.m. She served him 2 pints of beer, and because he was a regular customer, she would allow him to pour his own beer from time to time. His bill came to $10, and he told her he would pay her back the next time. Brian then told police he fell asleep about 5 minutes after going to bed. He would take the drug Seroquel as a sleep aid, but also stated that he had woken up several times by other residents of the house using the kitchen, the stairs, and the front door. He said that he only left his room once throughout the night, around 5 a.m., to use the bathroom and to turn off the kitchen light, except that nothing about his story was true because of that pesky little thing called DNA evidence. And then some disturbing circumstantial evidence was leaked to the media. A few days after he was arrested, an article in the National Post stated that someone using Brian Dickson's email address wrote disturbing messages in a forum on an adult website. And without going too much into the graphic details, he was promoting incest and highly illegal activities. His posts on these sites were pretty alarming. He admitted to being assaulted by a past baseball coach when he was younger, and that he enjoyed it. And when police searched his apartment, they found 103 pornographic DVDs, half of which were teenage Asian porn. But even with the growing list of circumstantial evidence and the DNA, Brian Dickson would choose to plead not guilty to the murder. His trial would begin in March of 2014, and it had an unusual start. Brian would attempt to plead guilty, not to murder, but to manslaughter. This plea, however, would be rejected by the Crown. Superior Court Justice Anne Molly would explain the difference between manslaughter and murder to the jury panel, saying that manslaughter lacks the level of intent required for murder. It happens when death is caused unintentionally through an unlawful act like assault. Second-degree murder is when the accused meant to cause death or harm to the victim. And if the degree for second-degree murder was met, but the death occurred while a sexual assault was being committed or attempted, in the eyes of the law, it's automatically considered first-degree murder. This weird attempt at a plea bargain essentially meant that Brian Dickson was acknowledging that he caused Qian's death. He was just denying that it was intentional. It was now up to his lawyers to convince the jury that this was a manslaughter case, not a murder. But this was going to be difficult to prove. Police would testify that Brian Dickson first became a suspect after Zhen Meng was interviewed and gave a physical description of the man he saw on the webcam to police. Brian was immediately put under surveillance and was caught discarding 2 cigarette butts, which were collected and sent off for DNA testing. While being interviewed by police, he said that he had been in Qian's room briefly that night, but had never touched her or kissed her or had sex with her, and he denied killing her. But the DNA evidence would say otherwise. The DNA from the collected cigarette butts would match the DNA swabs taken from Qian's body, and DNA found underneath Qian's fingernails also belonged to Brian Dickson. His DNA was found all over the scene, and due to the graphic nature of the crime and YouTube's terms of service, I have to withhold some of the details, but the odds that the semen found at the scene came from someone else was 1 in 2.7 quintillion. The odds that the male DNA under Qian's fingernails came from someone else were 1 in 17 billion. The mathematical chances of anyone other than Brian Dickson being the contributor of the DNA was literally astronomical. Qian's blood was also found on a blue t-shirt that belonged to Brian Dickson. The odds that it came from someone else were 1 in 140 quadrillion. Brian Dickson must have known that the jig was up shortly before he was arrested, because on the evening of April 19, 2010, after giving his statement to the police over a period of several hours, Brian Dickson went to a bar. While he was there, he told an acquaintance that he was going to jail for life. The prosecution would later rely on this statement as demonstrating that Brian Dickson was well aware that he had committed murder, as opposed to manslaughter. The judge, however, would deem this statement to be inadmissible in court, so the jury never heard about it. Several pathologists would testify, but could not conclusively determine Qian's cause of death. Pathologist Christopher Milroy testified that in his opinion, Qian's cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation due to neck compressions. Other autopsy findings, such as bruising in the neck muscles and small hemorrhages around Qian's eyes, were consistent with that finding. Dr. Jeff Tange couldn't arrive at a definitive cause of death for Qian, but would say that the best overall explanation was mechanical asphyxiation, which could be as a result of her neck or chest being compressed, or something interfering with the intake of air through her nose or mouth. And now the jury had to decide whether Brian Dickson had murderous intent. According to the defense, her death was an accident, but the prosecution would argue that Dickson didn't want to be held accountable for sexually assaulting Qian, so he killed her to silence her and took her laptop, which would never be recovered, in order to cover up the crime. Dickson's lawyer Robert Natel did his best to create reasonable doubt by questioning the pathologists who testified if it was possible Qian died of heart issues. However, the 3 pathologists who testified would all agree these were unlikely scenarios. After 12 days of testimony, it would take the jury only 4 hours to find Brian Dickson guilty of first-degree murder, which was punishable by an automatic life sentence, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. There were several facts about this case the jury never heard about due to a court-ordered publication ban. Some of this evidence would be presented at Dickson's bail hearing back in January of 2012, but wasn't introduced at his trial. The jury wasn't told about his online activities, the questionable message boards, his interest in underage girls, or that he allegedly sexually assaulted a woman that he met at a nightclub back in 2006. The jury also didn't know that he allegedly choked an ex-girlfriend and shoved 2 fingers down her throat after she caught him stealing money from her bank account to buy drugs. After the trial, Qian's heartbroken parents spoke with reporters, and while holding a large portrait of her, they thanked Canadians for their support and the police and prosecution for their professionalism and excellent work, and told reporters they believe the Canadian justice system is very good and fair, and that this wasn't just a crime against their daughter, but against society as a whole.
And maybe you may know that in Chinese culture, the April 5th we call Qingming Festival. For the people, we remember all the passed away people. So in this time, during just right on time, maybe this little bit I can have the good news to my daughter.
借这个机会，我们对有关方面做出的认真的取证工作，他们的职业精神和他们的工作付出，我们表示赞赏和表示感谢。
We really deeply appreciate and recognize all the police team and the crime team. They're all professional and excellent work for contribute to this case.
也感谢强大的华人社区背后有他们的支持，也包括加拿大公民的纳税人的支持，包括我们总领馆、市领馆和方方面面的一些协会的支持，我们才能等到这个判决的到来。
And we also deeply appreciate not just the Chinese Consul General Office and the Chinese community here. We also have the Canadian society, the member from like you guys come to give us the support and hang on until.
As for Brian Dickson, he wasted no time filing an appeal to his murder conviction and had the nerve to apply for a taxpayer-funded lawyer to represent him. Legal aid would refuse his request for funding, and his appeal would be denied. But that would not be the last time we would hear from Brian Dickson. He's also looking for love and has a profile on the website Canadian Inmates Connect. He's been on there for a while, so he's either receiving a buttload of mail or nothing at all. Brian Dickson's first parole hearing will occur in the year 2035 when he is 54 years old. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time to hang out with me today. If you enjoyed learning about this case, please be sure to like and subscribe. If there's a case you would like me to cover in a future video, let me know in the comments section down below. If you would like to support my channel, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee if you'd like to donate. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.